Autumn arrived at Ashbourne Manor with a fury that seemed determined to shake every ancient stone from its foundations. Rain lashed against towering stained-glass windows while thunder rolled across the dark hills, echoing through corridors where generations of proud ancestors had celebrated power instead of mercy. In the center of the grand entrance hall, 23-year-old Lady Evangeline Ashcroft knelt upon the cold marble floor beside a single weathered travel case, her hands folded quietly in her lap. Her simple stillness contrasted painfully with the storm raging beyond the walls and the colder tempest gathering inside her family. Servants lined the edges of the hall with lowered eyes, afraid to witness yet unable to look away. Noble guests lingered beneath glittering chandeliers, whispering behind jeweled fans as though they had assembled for evening entertainment rather than a daughter's public ruin. At the top of the sweeping staircase stood Marquis Reginald Ashcroft, tall, commanding, and wrapped in velvet trimmed with silver. His expression carried no trace of fatherly regret. Beside him stood Lady Beatrice, Evangeline's younger sister, celebrated throughout society for dazzling beauty, flawless manners, and an ambition as polished as the diamonds resting against her throat. "My greatest disappointment has never been your lack of intelligence," the Marquis declared, his voice cutting through the hall sharper than any blade. "It has always been your weakness. Compassion has made you unworthy of this family." Silence followed, broken only by rain striking the windows. The accusation arrived with calculated precision. Several nights earlier, dozens of starving villagers had mysteriously received sacks of grain taken from the Ashcroft storehouses during the kingdom's harshest harvest in decades. Hidden inside Evangeline's wardrobe, servants had conveniently discovered estate ledgers and warehouse keys. Every piece of evidence pointed toward her. Evangeline lifted her eyes toward Beatrice. For the briefest instant, her sister's satisfied smile flickered before disappearing beneath practiced innocence. That single glance revealed everything. She understood exactly who had orchestrated the deception. She also knew something no one else in the hall understood. 2 elderly stable servants had secretly helped distribute the grain after she begged them to feed hungry children. If she defended herself by exposing the forged evidence, suspicion would inevitably fall upon them. The Marquis believed mercy encouraged rebellion. They would face imprisonment, perhaps execution, simply for choosing kindness. Her heartbeat quickened. Her conscience remained steady. "I accept your judgment," she said softly. Gasps rippled through the gathering. Even the Marquis looked momentarily surprised that she offered neither excuses nor anger. "You confess," he demanded. "I accept whatever punishment you believe necessary." The answer satisfied everyone except Truth. One servant quietly wiped tears from his weathered face. Another bowed her head to hide trembling lips. Neither dared speak. The Marquis raised an official document bearing the Ashcroft seal. "From this hour, Lady Evangeline Ashcroft no longer belongs to this house." A steward stepped forward. One by one, symbols of her birth disappeared. Her jeweled necklace was removed. Her emerald ring slipped from her finger. The embroidered family crest was cut from her traveling cloak. Silk gowns, heirloom pearls, and treasured keepsakes were confiscated without hesitation. Finally, a plain gray governess dress was placed into her arms. Someone laughed. Someone applauded. Outside, lightning illuminated the stained glass like fractured fire. "You will earn your bread as a governess," the Marquis announced. "Perhaps common children will appreciate the tenderness noble blood cannot afford." Beatrice lowered her eyes modestly, concealing triumph. Evangeline changed into the simple dress without complaint. Its coarse fabric scratched her skin, yet somehow felt lighter than the expectation she had carried her entire life. Before leaving, she quietly approached the frightened servants whose lives she had protected. "No tears," she whispered. "Live well instead." Hours later, her carriage departed beneath relentless freezing rain. Newspapers in nearby towns eagerly repeated the scandal before sunrise, naming her the unwanted daughter whose own father had cast her away. Curious strangers stared whenever the coach stopped for fresh horses, but she answered every whisper with silence. The storm worsened as mountain roads dissolved beneath rushing water. Without warning, frightened horses lost their footing beside a swollen river. The carriage lurched violently before tumbling into the icy current. Splintered wood, shattered glass, and freezing water surrounded terrified cries. Through the chaos, Evangeline heard a young stable boy screaming beneath the overturned carriage. Ignoring the burning cold stealing her breath, she forced herself underwater again and again until she reached him. Her fingers found his trapped arm. With desperate strength, she dragged him free before fighting the current toward shore. Only after watching him breathe safely did exhaustion finally overwhelm her. Wrapped in borrowed blankets, bruised, soaked, and shivering, she refused every offer to remain behind. Blackwood Castle still awaited its unwanted governess. Near midnight, the towering fortress emerged through mist and rain like a lonely guardian overlooking the valley. Its ancient windows glowed faintly against the darkness, beautiful yet burdened by grief. Inside waited Duke Sebastian Blackwood, widowed for 3 years, father of 4 lonely children who had frightened away every governess brave enough to accept the position. He welcomed Evangeline with restrained courtesy rather than warmth, explaining that this opportunity existed only because nobody else would come. She simply nodded, thanked him, and followed a silent housekeeper toward the nursery. That night, instead of commanding restless children into bed, she gathered them before the library fireplace and opened an old fairy tale. One by one, wary expressions softened. Little Lily climbed quietly into her lap. Theodore leaned against the arm of her chair. Charlotte rested at her feet. Even Oliver pretended to study a shelf while secretly listening. When the final page closed, every child had fallen peacefully asleep around her. Standing unnoticed in the doorway, Sebastian stared at the impossible scene, wondering whether the broken heart of his home had finally heard its first hopeful heartbeat again. For the first time since loss claimed his family, the Duke did not walk away. Hope lingered silently there. Morning sunlight entered Blackwood Castle cautiously, as though even the dawn remembered years of sorrow. Golden beams slipped through towering windows, touching polished floors that had reflected silence for far too long. Servants moved through the corridors with practiced restraint, expecting another day filled with slammed doors, childish arguments, and the quiet disappointment that had settled over the estate since the Duchess's passing. Instead, they paused in astonishment as laughter drifted from the breakfast room before the first tray had even reached the table. Evangeline stood beside the youngest children, helping Lily spread honey onto warm bread while Theodore attempted to pour milk without spilling it. Charlotte giggled as a stubborn curl escaped Lily's ribbon, and even 13-year-old Oliver, who usually arrived late with a carefully rehearsed scowl, accepted a plate without complaint. No one noticed that Duke Sebastian had stopped outside the doorway, watching unseen as his children exchanged smiles instead of accusations. He entered only after everyone had begun eating. The conversation ended immediately. The children straightened in their chairs. Fear, old and familiar, returned to their eyes. Evangeline looked toward the Duke with quiet composure. "Oliver was just explaining the history of the castle gardens," she said gently. "I believe he knows more about them than anyone." The unexpected praise caught the boy completely off guard. Sebastian glanced toward his eldest son. "Is that true?" Oliver hesitated before nodding. His father simply replied, "Then perhaps you'll show me them someday." The smallest exchange accomplished what years of discipline never had. For the first time, father and son shared a conversation that ended without anger. From that morning onward, invisible changes spread through Blackwood Castle. The dusty music room echoed once again with melodies as Evangeline taught Charlotte simple songs upon the old pianoforte. Theodore discovered surprising patience while tending vegetables in the neglected kitchen garden. Lily proudly collected wildflowers every afternoon, insisting every vase in the castle deserved fresh colors. Even Oliver reluctantly admitted that painting landscapes beside the lake required more courage than fencing lessons ever had. The servants began smiling without realizing it. The kitchens filled with the comforting scent of fresh bread because Evangeline insisted every child should know how warmth could be made with their own hands. Elderly housemaids laughed while flour dust floated through sunbeams like tiny stars. Footmen no longer hurried nervously whenever the children approached, because broken dishes and shouting had become increasingly rare. The castle itself seemed to breathe differently. Gardens once abandoned beneath tangled weeds slowly awakened beneath careful hands. Roses planted years earlier by the late Duchess bloomed once again after Evangeline discovered neglected roots hidden beneath overgrown ivy. She never claimed the flowers as her own. Instead, she quietly placed a small wooden sign beside the garden path. "For her grace, whose kindness still grows here." When Sebastian discovered the inscription one evening, he stood among the blossoms long after twilight settled across the estate. She had preserved his wife's memory instead of replacing it. That realization lingered within him far longer than he wished to admit. Days turned into gentle weeks. Every evening, the family gathered beside the grand library fireplace exactly as they had on Evangeline's first night. Ancient fairy tales gave way to adventures, histories, and legends. Sometimes the children interrupted with endless questions. Sometimes they simply rested against her shoulders, listening to the crackling fire while rain whispered against towering windows. Those evenings slowly became sacred. Sebastian often remained hidden beyond the doorway. He told himself he merely wished to ensure discipline remained intact. Deep inside he knew the truth. He had begun waiting for the sound of her voice. One rainy afternoon, Evangeline wandered into the castle attic searching for art supplies. Instead, she discovered forgotten trunks filled with dolls, wooden horses, tiny tea sets, and embroidered blankets that had belonged to Sebastian's late wife during her own childhood before being lovingly passed to their children. Most were damaged. Several had been broken during grief-stricken outbursts after the Duchess died. Evangeline carried every toy downstairs. Night after night, while the household slept, she carefully stitched torn fabric, polished faded paint, replaced missing ribbons, and carved tiny wooden wheels for broken wagons. One evening Sebastian entered the sewing room unexpectedly. She didn't hear him. Her attention remained fixed upon a cracked porcelain doll resting gently in her lap. A single tear slipped down her cheek before falling onto the faded lace dress. "I wish your mother had stayed," she whispered softly to the empty room. Children should never grow up believing love disappears forever. Sebastian remained motionless. No words formed. Something inside him shifted with quiet certainty. Until that moment he had admired her goodness. Now he understood its depth. She loved his children without asking them to forget the woman who had first loved them. Spring arrived carrying fields of wildflowers beyond the estate. The children begged for a picnic beside the narrow stream winding through blooming meadows. Sebastian reluctantly agreed. Laughter followed them beneath flowering trees as blankets were spread upon soft grass. Theodore skipped stones while Oliver pretended not to race Charlotte toward an old oak tree. Lily chased bright butterflies until one drifted across the shallow stream. Without thinking, she hurried after it. The muddy bank crumbled beneath her tiny shoes. Evangeline lunged first. She caught Lily safely but lost her own footing. Both tumbled into the freezing water. Before anyone could scream twice, Sebastian plunged into the stream fully clothed. The icy current tugged fiercely at Evangeline's skirts. Strong arms reached her. He lifted Lily onto the bank before gathering Evangeline against his chest. Neither spoke as he carried her through blooming fields toward dry blankets. Water glistened upon loose strands of her dark hair. She looked up. His gray eyes met hers. For one suspended heartbeat, the world narrowed until only shared breathing existed between them. Then Lily wrapped tiny arms around both adults simultaneously. The moment dissolved into relieved laughter. Yet neither heart returned unchanged. That evening, after the children had bathed and changed into warm nightclothes, they gathered once more inside the library. Rain tapped gently against tall windows while firelight danced across endless shelves filled with old leather-bound books. Evangeline kissed each child upon the forehead before tucking blankets carefully around sleepy shoulders. She wished them peaceful dreams and quietly left the room, unaware that Sebastian remained hidden outside the doorway. Little Lily snuggled closer beneath her quilt and smiled dreamily at Charlotte. "Mama always kisses us good night," she whispered. The word struck Sebastian harder than any sword ever could. He stood frozen in the shadows, unable to breathe, because no child had corrected her, and deep within his own guarded heart, neither had he. Winter arrived without mercy. The first snowfall transformed Blackwood Castle into a kingdom of white silence, burying gardens beneath glittering drifts and covering ancient forests with blankets of untouched snow. Icicles hung from stone battlements like crystal swords, while bitter winds swept across the hills, carrying the lonely cries of distant ravens. Inside the castle, roaring fireplaces pushed back the cold, and the children eagerly pressed their faces against frost-covered windows, marveling at the season's first great storm. Evangeline watched them with quiet affection. "Promise me," she said gently, "that none of you will enter the forest without permission. Snow hides dangers that summer never reveals." All four children nodded obediently. At least they intended to. 2 days later, while helping the housekeeper prepare blankets for nearby villagers, Evangeline noticed Lily's favorite blue scarf missing from its hook. Charlotte's winter boots had disappeared as well. A strange uneasiness settled inside her chest. She hurried toward the nursery and found every bed empty. Oliver's desk held a folded piece of paper. "We found tracks," it read. "The white stag is hurt. We'll bring him home before supper." The letter slipped from her fingers. She remembered Theodore excitedly describing mysterious hoofprints near the edge of the forest the previous evening. They had believed an injured white stag wandered alone beneath the snow, frightened and unable to survive without help. The castle erupted into alarm. Servants scattered across the grounds. Stable hands saddled horses. Sebastian barked orders with military precision, sending guards toward every woodland trail. Yet Evangeline knew something the others did not. The children always followed the stream whenever they explored. She mounted the fastest mare before anyone could stop her. "Miss Ashcroft," a groom shouted. But she was already disappearing into the swirling snowfall. Snow stung her face as the horse galloped beneath towering pines. Branches sagged under heavy ice, shedding frozen powder whenever the wind shook them. Visibility faded until the world became little more than white mist and dark tree trunks. Then she heard it. A frightened scream. "Lily!" She urged the mare forward. Beyond a frozen clearing stood the four children, huddled tightly together upon a fallen log. Before them lay a magnificent white stag with blood staining one hind leg. The animal trembled helplessly, unable to escape. Around them circled 6 gaunt wolves. Their ribs showed beneath thick winter coats. Hunger burned brighter than fear inside pale amber eyes. Oliver held a broken branch like a sword. Theodore clutched Charlotte protectively. Lily cried quietly without moving. The wolves crept closer. Evangeline dismounted before the horse had fully stopped. She seized the brass hunting horn fastened beside the saddle and lifted the lantern hanging from its hook. "Stay exactly where you are," she shouted. The children turned. Relief flooded their faces. "Mama?" The single word gave her courage greater than any weapon. She stepped between the children and the wolves. The lantern's warm light flickered against snapping jaws. She blew the hunting horn with every breath her lungs could gather. Its powerful cry echoed through the frozen forest. Several wolves hesitated. One retreated. Another growled lower, uncertain. But the largest wolf remained. It lowered its head. Its ears flattened. Slowly it advanced. Evangeline spread her arms wider, shielding the children behind her. "Do not move," she whispered. Theodore's frightened voice trembled. "We're sorry." She never looked back. "I know." The wolf lunged. She swung the lantern. Glass shattered against its shoulder, scattering burning oil across the snow. Flames flared briefly before dying beneath falling flakes. The startled animal recoiled, but another wolf darted around her left side. Charlotte screamed. Evangeline pushed Lily beneath her heavy cloak and grabbed Theodore's arm, pulling both children behind her just as sharp teeth tore across her shoulder. Pain exploded through her body. Warm blood stained the white snow. Still she refused to fall. Again she lifted the hunting horn. Again its desperate call rang through the wilderness. The wolves circled faster now. They sensed weakness. The injured stag struggled desperately to stand but collapsed once more, unable to flee. Oliver picked up a fallen branch and rushed toward the nearest wolf. "No!" Evangeline cried. She caught him just before another animal leaped. Its claws slashed across her back. She stumbled to one knee. The children gathered around her instinctively, trying to shield the woman who had come to protect them. Snow swirled violently. Then another sound shattered the forest. Horse hooves. Dozens of them. Sebastian burst into the clearing leading mounted guards through waist-deep snow. His face carried a terror none had ever witnessed. "There!" one guard shouted. The largest wolf sprang toward Evangeline once more. Sebastian drew his hunting rifle. One deafening shot echoed between the trees. The charging wolf collapsed only feet away. The remaining pack scattered into the blizzard as mounted riders pursued them through the forest. Silence returned almost immediately. Only the wind remained. Sebastian leaped from his horse and dropped beside Evangeline. Blood soaked her torn cloak. Her breathing came in shallow, painful whispers. The children clung to her desperately. "They're safe," Oliver kept repeating through tears. "They're safe." Sebastian gently gathered Evangeline into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Her head rested against his shoulder. Snowflakes melted in her dark hair. As they began the long ride back toward the castle, she forced her heavy eyelids open one final time. "Please," she whispered. He leaned closer. "Save the children." "They're safe," he answered firmly. "Because of you." A faint smile touched her lips. Then consciousness slipped away. For 3 endless days Blackwood Castle existed between hope and despair. Physicians came and went carrying blood-stained bandages. Fever refused to loosen its grip. Every hour Sebastian remained beside her bed, ignoring food, sleep, and every responsibility beyond the chamber door. He held her hand whenever nightmares stole her breathing, believing somehow she would always find her way back if she felt someone waiting. The children visited together each evening. They spoke softly about ordinary things. Charlotte described new roses she planned to plant. Theodore promised never to disobey again. Oliver quietly apologized for leading everyone into danger. Little Lily simply curled beside Evangeline's pillow and waited. On the morning of the fourth day, pale winter sunlight slipped through the curtains. Evangeline's fingers moved. Slowly her eyes opened. She found Sebastian asleep in the chair beside her, his head resting near the mattress, one strong hand still wrapped gently around hers. She smiled weakly. The slight movement woke him instantly. Relief flooded his exhausted face. Without thinking, without considering duty, reputation, or consequence, he bent forward and pressed the gentlest kiss against her forehead. Before either could speak, the chamber door burst open. The children rushed inside. Lily reached the bedside first, tears shining like tiny diamonds upon her cheeks. She wrapped both arms around Evangeline with all the strength her little heart possessed. "Mama came back," she whispered. Sebastian looked into Evangeline's eyes, and for the first time neither of them turned away from the truth quietly growing between them. Spring returned slowly to Blackwood Castle, washing away the last traces of snow with gentle rain and pale golden sunlight. Wounds healed, flowers awakened, and laughter once again wandered through the ancient halls. Evangeline's shoulders still ached whenever she lifted Lily into her arms, yet she never complained. Every scar reminded her that 4 precious lives had been spared. The children refused to leave her side for long, as though fearing she might disappear if they looked away. Sebastian noticed every quiet gesture, the way Theodore instinctively reached for her hand, the way Charlotte leaned against her while reading, the way Oliver sought her advice before making even simple decisions. Without ceremony or announcement, she had become the heart around which his family quietly revolved. Rumors, however, traveled faster than spring winds. Across the kingdom, nobles whispered that Duke Sebastian Blackwood had fallen under the influence of the banished Ashcroft daughter. Some claimed she intended to trap him into marriage. Others insisted she had bewitched his children to secure wealth she had lost. Every lie eventually found its way to Ashbourne Manor. Marquis Reginald Ashcroft listened with growing disbelief. The unwanted daughter he had cast aside was no longer pitied. She was admired. The Duke's household praised her. Servants throughout neighboring estates spoke of her kindness. Even merchants described Blackwood Castle as brighter than it had been in years. The Marquis saw danger where others saw redemption. If Evangeline gained the protection of one of the kingdom's most respected dukes, the lies surrounding her banishment might finally unravel. He would not allow that. One bright morning, 6 elegant carriages rolled through Blackwood Castle's iron gates. Ashcroft banners fluttered proudly above polished coaches while liveried footmen announced distinguished visitors. Sebastian greeted them with restrained courtesy in the great drawing room, though surprise darkened his expression when Reginald entered beside Lady Beatrice. Evangeline froze. Months had passed since she had seen the family that abandoned her. Nothing in their faces suggested remorse. Reginald offered a cold smile. "It appears our misguided daughter has enjoyed remarkable hospitality." "I am no longer your daughter," Evangeline answered quietly. His eyes hardened. "You remain my responsibility until I decide otherwise." Sebastian stepped forward. "Lady Evangeline is a respected member of this household." "A governess," Beatrice interrupted with a dismissive laugh. "Surely your grace understands the difference." Lily immediately slipped her small hand into Evangeline's. Charlotte and Theodore moved closer. Even Oliver stood protectively beside her. The silent gesture spoke louder than argument. Beatrice's smile faltered. Reginald noticed it too. His carefully rehearsed confidence weakened as he realized the children genuinely loved the woman he had discarded. Determined to regain control, he announced before everyone present that Evangeline had always been deceitful, sentimental, and unworthy of noble trust. He repeated the accusations surrounding the missing grain, insisting Blackwood Castle had welcomed a confessed thief beneath its roof. Before Sebastian could answer, an unexpected voice echoed from the entrance. "That cannot possibly be true." An elderly woman dressed in modest royal blue stepped slowly into the room, supported by an ivory cane. Deep lines marked her face, yet her sharp gray eyes missed nothing. The Duke immediately bowed. Lady Miriam. She had served the royal nursery decades earlier before retiring from court. The elderly nurse had traveled to Blackwood Castle hoping to thank the courageous governess who had saved 4 children from wolves. As she approached Evangeline, her gaze softened with unexpected tenderness. "You remind me of someone," she whispered. Evangeline smiled politely. "I fear you've mistaken me." "Perhaps." Lady Miriam reached gently toward Evangeline's shoulder. "The physician mentioned your bandages remain uncomfortable. May I adjust them?" With quiet permission, she carefully loosened the edge of the dressing where the wolf's claws had torn through fabric. Suddenly the old nurse stopped breathing. Hidden just behind Evangeline's shoulder rested a small crescent-shaped birthmark. Lady Miriam's cane slipped from trembling fingers. "No," she whispered. Tears filled her eyes. "No, it cannot be." Every conversation ceased. The elderly woman reached inside a worn leather satchel and withdrew an aged miniature portrait protected beneath cracked glass. It depicted an infant wrapped in royal blankets, one tiny shoulder exposed. The same crescent-shaped mark. 23 years vanished from her memory. "I bathed the royal princess every morning," Lady Miriam said, her voice shaking. "I would recognize this mark even on my dying day." Confusion swept across the room. Reginald's face turned pale. Beatrice stared silently at her father. Sebastian looked between them, sensing a truth far greater than anyone understood. Lady Miriam slowly explained what history had forgotten. 23 years earlier, flames consumed part of the royal palace during a violent uprising. Amid smoke and collapsing beams, the infant princess disappeared. Soldiers searched for weeks. Rivers were dragged. Forests were combed. Eventually the kingdom accepted that the child had perished. Only one woman knew otherwise. A loyal noblewoman had rescued the baby from the burning nursery moments before the roof collapsed. Pursued by conspirators hoping to destroy the royal bloodline forever, she fled across the countryside. Desperate to hide the child, she entrusted the infant to an influential nobleman she believed honorable enough to protect her. That nobleman had been Reginald Ashcroft. Every eye turned toward him. His proud posture crumbled. "I intended to return her," he murmured weakly. "But you never did," Lady Miriam answered. Reginald closed his eyes. "At first I feared the conspirators still hunted her. Later, I realized raising the lost princess offered opportunities impossible to ignore. If one day I revealed her identity, my family would stand closer to the throne than any house in the kingdom." Beatrice stepped backward in horror. "You used her?" "I prepared her for greatness." "You prepared her for obedience," Evangeline said softly. The room fell silent again. Reginald's shoulders sagged beneath years of hidden guilt. "When she grew older," he admitted, "she cared more about hungry children than power. She refused every political match I arranged. She embarrassed our ambitions. She became impossible to control." "So you destroyed her instead," Sebastian said, his voice colder than winter. No one defended the Marquis. Royal messengers arrived before sunset, summoned immediately after Lady Miriam's testimony reached the capital. Ancient records, forgotten letters, and the jeweled ribbon wrapped around the miniature portrait all confirmed the impossible truth. Before assembled nobles, ministers, and witnesses inside Blackwood Castle's Great Hall, the king's official decree recognized Evangeline as the long-lost royal princess. Every noble who had once mocked the unwanted daughter slowly lowered to one knee. Reginald knelt too. Tears streamed down his weathered face. "Forgive me," he whispered. Evangeline looked not at the man who had abandoned her, nor at the nobles bowing before newly discovered royalty. Instead, she turned toward 4 frightened children standing together near Sebastian, uncertain whether a princess would still belong with them. She crossed the hall without hesitation, knelt before them, and opened her arms. They rushed into her embrace, and she held them as though crowns, titles, and kingdoms had become meaningless beside 4 beating hearts. Watching the reunion, Sebastian realized the kingdom had found its princess, yet he feared the palace might now claim forever the woman who had become the soul of his home. The news spread across the kingdom before sunrise. Bells rang from cathedral towers, royal banners unfurled above ancient walls, and every noble household awoke to the astonishing proclamation that the lost princess had been found alive after 23 years. Yet while courtiers hurried toward the capital hoping to secure favor with the newly restored royal daughter, Evangeline remained inside Blackwood Castle, sitting quietly beside the library fireplace where 4 children leaned against her as though nothing in the world had changed. Oliver pretended to read while secretly watching her face. Theodore carved tiny wooden birds at her feet. Charlotte rested her head upon Evangeline's shoulder, and little Lily slept peacefully in her lap. The room glowed with warmth, but uncertainty lingered beyond the windows like an approaching storm. Sebastian stood silently near the doorway, unable to ignore the fear tightening around his heart. The kingdom had reclaimed its princess. Surely the palace would reclaim her next. That afternoon, a royal procession arrived beneath fluttering crimson standards. The king himself entered Blackwood Castle, accompanied by ministers, guards, and Lady Miriam. His silver hair reflected the afternoon light, yet his eyes carried unmistakable sorrow. The moment he saw Evangeline, he stopped walking. For several long seconds neither spoke. Then the king crossed the hall without ceremony. "My child," he whispered. His voice broke before the final word. Evangeline bowed respectfully, but before she could kneel, the king gently lifted her to her feet. "You have spent your entire life apologizing for crimes you never committed," he said. "You will never kneel to me." Tears filled countless eyes throughout the hall. The king embraced the daughter he had believed dead for more than 2 decades. There were no royal speeches, only the quiet grief of a father mourning lost years that could never be returned. When he finally stepped back, his gaze moved toward the 4 children still gathered around Evangeline. "They love you." "They became my family," she answered softly. "I can see that." During the following days, preparations began for Evangeline's formal recognition at court. Designers arrived carrying magnificent gowns embroidered with silver thread. Jewelers presented heirloom tiaras. Tutors offered lessons in forgotten royal ceremonies. She accepted every responsibility with grace. Yet every evening she returned to the same library, exchanged silk for simple dresses, and read stories until 4 sleepy children drifted into peaceful dreams. The palace dazzled her eyes. Blackwood Castle held her heart. One evening the king requested a private conversation inside the castle gardens. Roses bloomed around quiet stone paths while fountains reflected the fading sunset. "You belong beside the throne," he said gently. "I belong wherever I am needed. You are needed by an entire kingdom." She smiled sadly. "A kingdom may admire a princess, for children need a mother." The king studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I hoped you would answer exactly that way." She looked at him in surprise. "The crown has many servants," he continued, "but kindness cannot be commanded. You have already chosen the life worthy of a queen." Relief softened her features. For the first time since learning the truth of her birth, she felt understood rather than claimed. Meanwhile, Sebastian struggled with a different battle. Every instinct urged him to remain silent. How could a widowed duke presume to ask for the hand of a princess? Love did not erase rank. Duty demanded sacrifice. Lady Miriam found him standing alone beside the castle chapel one rainy morning. "You intend to let fear decide your future," she observed. "I intend to honor hers." "By abandoning your own heart?" "I have nothing worthy of offering." The elderly nurse smiled knowingly. "You offered her trust before you knew she was royal. Your children offered her love before they knew she wore a crown. Why should truth make your gifts less valuable?" Her words settled deeply within him. That evening invitations summoned nobles from every province to the royal palace for Evangeline's public presentation as princess. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the magnificent throne room while musicians filled the air with solemn melodies. Dukes, princes, ambassadors, and foreign dignitaries lined both sides of the great hall, many already imagining political marriages that might strengthen their influence. Evangeline entered wearing an elegant ivory gown adorned with delicate silver embroidery. A modest diamond tiara rested upon her dark hair, yet nothing about her expression suggested pride. She walked with quiet dignity, smiling first toward the king, then toward Lady Miriam. Finally her eyes searched the gathering. She found Sebastian standing near the rear beside Oliver, Theodore, Charlotte, and Lily. The children smiled hopefully. Sebastian remained perfectly still. The king completed the formal declaration restoring his daughter's name, heritage, and royal rights. Thunderous applause echoed beneath vaulted ceilings. Then he surprised everyone. "My daughter," he announced, "has earned the right to choose her own future. No arrangement, title, or tradition shall decide it for her." Silence swept through the hall. Before anyone could speak, Sebastian stepped forward. Every noble watched. Every courtier whispered. He walked directly toward Evangeline until only a single step separated them. Without hesitation, he lowered himself onto one knee. The hall fell utterly silent. "I cannot offer a throne," he said quietly. "I do not need one," she answered, though tears already shimmered in her eyes. "I cannot promise perfect days. I never asked for them. I can only promise that 4 children and 1 imperfect man will spend every remaining day trying to deserve the love you've already given us." His voice trembled. "Will you allow us to belong to you forever?" The world seemed to stop breathing. Evangeline looked toward the children. Oliver nodded with quiet determination. Theodore grinned through tears. Charlotte clasped her hands beneath her chin. Little Lily whispered, "Please?" Evangeline laughed softly through joyful tears before taking Sebastian's hands and helping him rise. I thought I had already found my answer beside a library fireplace, she whispered. Yes. With all my heart, yes. Applause erupted like thunder. Even seasoned ministers wiped their eyes. The king himself smiled more broadly than anyone present. Several weeks later, sunlight streamed through the towering windows of the royal cathedral. White roses decorated every column, while choirs filled the sacred space with hymns celebrating hope instead of power. Evangeline walked slowly toward the altar wearing a breathtaking cream gown embroidered with tiny lilies and climbing roses, symbols of purity and enduring love. Instead of flower girls and ceremonial pages, Oliver, Theodore, Charlotte, and Lily proudly accompanied her, each carrying a single white blossom. Halfway down the aisle, Lily looked proudly toward the gathered nobles. "She's our mother," she announced with delighted certainty. Gentle laughter and warm applause swept through the cathedral. Not one person doubted her. After exchanging vows, Sebastian placed the wedding ring upon Evangeline's finger before kissing her forehead exactly as he had the morning she awakened from fever. The simple gesture carried more meaning than any grand display. Months passed. Blackwood Castle flourished like never before. With the king's blessing, part of the estate became a school for village children, another wing transformed into a small hospital, and the old granaries that had once inspired false accusations now supplied food throughout every difficult winter. Evangeline insisted no hungry family should ever fear asking for bread. Sebastian proudly supported every endeavor, while the children eagerly helped distribute books, blankets, and meals. One gentle evening, rain tapped softly against the tall library windows. Firelight danced across polished shelves exactly as it had on the night Evangeline first opened an old fairy tale before 4 grieving children. She now wore a graceful cream gown instead of a plain gray governess's dress, yet the warmth in her smile remained unchanged. Oliver sat reading beside the hearth. Theodore rested against the rug with a sleeping puppy. Charlotte embroidered flowers into a cushion. Lily curled happily against her mother's side while listening to another story. Sebastian paused once more in the familiar doorway. Years earlier he had stood there hidden by sorrow. Tonight he walked forward without hesitation. He kissed his wife's forehead, gathered every child close, and looked around the room that had become the heart of their lives. "Our castle was never missing a queen," he said softly. "It was only waiting for you." Outside, the rain finally ceased. Clouds parted above Blackwood Castle and golden sunlight spilled across the gardens where roses bloomed over old scars, proving that love chosen freely could transform even the deepest rejection into a home worthy of heaven itself.